Hi, everyone. If you can hear me, can you throw a hi in the chat? I'm Shakeia Taylor. For those of you who do not know me yet, I am a sports writer with the Chicago Tribune. Super excited tonight for our guest. Um, it is, as you all know already, Vanessa Ivy Rose. She is the granddaughter of Baseball Hall of Famer and Negro League's great Turkey Stearnes. She is the author of Hall of Fame DNA, The Legacy of Norman Turkey Stearnes, a host of the ABC News podcast Reclaim the Forgotten League, an educator, and a former Division I collegiate athlete from Detroit, Michigan. She has worked in public education for nearly 2 decades, teaching English and history. Vanessa continues to honor her grandfather's legacy through Hall of Fame DNA. Hi, Vanessa.
Hey, Shakeia, how are you?
I am excellent. It is so good to see you. I've been hearing your voice for so many months now, so it's nice to have a face to go with the voice.
Yeah, I've been listening to your voice too. I mean, you sound amazing in the podcast, so you already know. I was so happy to meet you face to face
Thank
because of that. It was
you.
you were crushing it.
Thank you so much. I mean, since we mentioned the podcast, we may as well just start there.
Yeah,
How did this podcast Reclaimed come to be for you?
it's an amazing story. My family has been advocating for my granddad for so many years, starting with my grandmother, um, who passed away in 2014. But, in 1979, when my grandfather passed, she had started writing letters to everyone, the Hall of Fame, city officials, all the baseball people. And so, she was advocating and he ended up going into the Hall of Fame in the year 2000. So I like to credit that to her and all the work that she did to, continue advocating for his legacy. But after she passed away, the torch was of course passed to my mom and also to my aunt. And being the youngest to really want to talk about this and having such a devoted um, mindset when it comes to sports, I was like, okay, I want to take this serious. And grandma definitely had taught me so much about granddad growing up. So I had written some articles, I had done some speaking, and my mom and my aunt sang the anthem at the Tigers game during the Negro Leagues weekend. So we've been interviewed quite a few times by various publications and people. And ABC had a website through 538. The journalists at 538 were comparing Negro League stats to Major League stats. And when they did that, what they found was so surprising. They were like, wow, this could probably shake up what we know about baseball, but also what we know about history. So that led them to Detroit. They sent two producers out from ABC to talk to Ron Teasley's family. And, Ron Teasley is 96 years old. He'll be 97 next month. And he was a Negro Leagues legend. So being a living legend, they of course wanted to talk to him. They also wanted to talk to my family. And so I was lucky and fortunate enough to talk to them, and they loved what I had to say. And one of the producers was like, you know what, really liked your interview, but actually, how would you like to host this thing? So I was I couldn't turn that down. I was excited, ecstatic. I'm sure Grandma Nettie and Grandpa Turkey were cheering from heaven on that one.
Absolutely. I know your grandmother and your mother shared a lot with you growing up, but like, what are the kinds of things that they told you growing up about your grandfather that instilled, like, you have a really strong sense of pride in this, and it really shines through.
Thank you. Yeah, they so Grandpa was really quiet. He was introverted. I guess he would play ball and then go straight home. So he wasn't like the athletes we see today that are, living it up and, beating their chests and yelling and posting on social media and doing all these things. So what they taught me was that he was reserved. He was a man of strong faith, that he was completely devoted to baseball. He took it very serious, and even the quotes that have been shared online and through various Negro leaguers have talked about, and even from himself too, but have talked about him being a team player and him not caring how many home runs he hit. He only cared if he hit a home run to win the game. And so, all the things that I've read online or have learned through historians like Larry Lester and Gary Gillette and all these awesome people, have been validated by the stories that my mom, my grandmother, and also my aunt have told me over time. But they definitely talked about, him being a role model for Black excellence. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he didn't party. He was just into baseball, his faith, and his family. So he was pretty reserved for a professional athlete.
Did you learn anything in the process of making this podcast that you maybe didn't know before?
Oh yeah, yeah. I thought I knew, and I should know better. Being a teacher, right? It's like you're never done learning. What
Right.
the great Maya Angelou talk about, when she was in her 80s before she passed, she talked about how you're en route, and I think that definitely is something that I could say would describe my experience with the podcast too as well. I mean, I learned so much from things that you shared, things from Gary Gillette again, learning about Negro leaguers that have had some really hidden stories. Their history had been erased. And I mean, that's why it's called the Forgotten League, right? But I thought I had a pretty strong foundation, especially being the grandkid of a Negro League star. And I was blown away by the information that I received about, the various players, the managers, the ins and outs, and just different. There were so many little details that I didn't know. And so now I'm deep diving, into other stories too as well. I wish the podcast was more than 6 episodes because there's no way. I mean, there's some really big names we didn't even get to talk about, right? But um, I think one of the things that I learned that I was really shocked about was ABC actually found some secret tape of my granddad talking. And I had heard his interview before because my mom had a copy, but also there was a copy that was restored by a journalist named Dave Mesri, who's also a family friend of ours too. And um, it was amazing to hear my grandfather's voice because I had never heard him speak since he passed in 1979. I wasn't born until 4 years later. So I had heard the one interview and it was very emotional for me. Just a dream come true to be able to hear his voice because I would love to have a conversation with him. That's my one wish, even more than wishing to see him play. I would love to talk to my granddad. So being able to hear his voice was an unbelievable experience. But ABC actually found a secret tape that journalist Joe LaPointe, who conducted the interview back in the 70s, had in the vault somewhere. So I got to hear even more of him speaking, and it was just the best experience. I can't even put it into words, what that felt like to, rediscover something that I didn't even know existed. And I think that's what the experience of working on the podcast was like. There's so many hidden gems. It's like discovering treasure over and over and over again repeatedly.
That's a beautiful story, by the way. Like I knew this was a real experience for you, with it being so personal. And you said that you would have liked for the podcast to be longer than 6 episodes. What types of things would you have wanted to go into?
Yeah, there were so many other players that I think we didn't even really get to talk about. Like I really wanted to talk about women more and their contribution to the Negro Leagues. I think everyone that we touched on, we had to make sure that we could tell their story and leave you wanting more, but also it was a little bit brief in terms of what I like to hear. I mean, I can't even. I'll be honest. I love to hear, Jada Pinkett Smith had her 2.5 hour interview with Jay Shetty, and I'm like, give it all to me. I want to hear every little detail, and I love when people are vulnerable and share, so that we can learn from them. And so, I mean, I would love to dive into the story of women more. I would love to dive more into Buck O'Neill's story too, as well. I mean, I had the chance to meet him when I was 16, and we went to Cooperstown. I definitely would love to talk about the um, impact on MLB in terms of where we are now. I mean, definitely the podcast does a great job. Don't get me wrong
Right.
of packing a lot into 6 episodes, but there's so much more to cover in terms of talking about the entire legacy of the Negro League. So I think it's definitely unfinished, even though you do have to end it somewhere, right? So
I know you are extremely passionate about the records of Negro Leagues players being accepted by, Major League Baseball and others. Talk to me a little bit about that. You have really been on a little tear on that a little bit. Like, and I love it. Like just hearing from you. So talk to us about that.
Well, I think, this podcast is giving a voice to the voiceless. And I take that serious because, like I said, I never met my grandfather. Look at all of our ancestors who were out here doing incredible things and had this history erased. There's so many people today who I go to baseball games all the time. I go to Tigers games all the time. And people have no idea about the Negro League still, even though the Tigers do a pretty good job of talking about Negro Leagues weekend and the various, figures who were so important and vital. But this elevation of stats, right? It was announced to us in 2020. There was pretty much silence for 3 years in terms of the public hearing anything about the specifics of that, or we still don't have a timeline for when this is going to be completed. And, I know that it's a difficult task. I know that they have to be very resourceful and thoughtful about how they do this. But at the same time, I also think, and we mentioned this in the podcast, the story of Black people is being told to wait, right? And the story of Black history, it seems like many times the finish line is always moved, right? And so I know that MLB definitely cares about the Negro Leagues, and I know that they understand that these are some of baseball's greatest heroes. They want to honor them with integrity. I'm really excited about that. But in terms of a timeline or specific details, we still don't have that. Like I said, I mentioned Ron Teasley, and he's 96 years old. That man deserves his flowers. I mean, he is a living legend, and there's only a few Negro Leaguers left. Like we definitely want to get this done before, they transition, because I know that pain of my grandfather passing away in 1979, not going into the Hall of Fame until the year 2000. Here it is, 2023. We're celebrating a centennial of him moving from Tennessee to Detroit to start his professional career. And yet there are still people who say, who's Turkey Stearnes, or I've never heard of him. I've never heard of the Negro Leagues. And I mean, that has to change. If there's some of the greatest baseball players of all time, we need to recognize these heroes, and getting that work done with the stats, I think will definitely spread a lot of awareness and elevate people's knowledge.
Aside from the books and the podcast, you mentioned the centennial. What are you and your family doing to keep your grandfather's name out there or to put it out there even more?
Yeah, fortunately, we have some great help. I mean, SABR's been awesome. The Jerry Malloy Conference has been incredible. Like I mentioned before, there's some incredible historians who helped to spread awareness about my grandfather's legacy. But in terms of our family, one of the main things we do or have been doing for years is participating in Negro Leagues weekend in Detroit every summer. Um, being able to talk about my grandfather's legacy and sharing that with fans, sharing that with people within the organization. But we're actually looking to start up a Turkey Stearnes Foundation soon. So we're in the process of doing that right now, because we definitely want to, help the city of Detroit. We have 3 educators in the family, and my mom, my aunt, and also myself. So we recognize the value of education, and also my grandfather was really big into that. I don't think people know that he really cared a great deal about education, and always told little kids stay in school. When he's walking around the neighborhood or going to local ball fields and things like that, he would tell kids to stay in school. So he really valued education. So we want to continue that. But we also just want to help the community, not just with baseball, but again, education, looking at social justice issues too as well, and helping out any way we can. We're also part of the Negro Leagues Family Alliance. And so, there's some fantastic people in that alliance that are doing great work too as well, that we're partnering up with and collaborating with too. So looking forward to doing many events in the future, and spreading more awareness about the Negro Leagues and helping people to, again, elevate the frequency.
I was going to ask you about the Negro Leagues Family Alliance. I'm only just newly familiar with it. Um, who's in that? What can you tell us about that? And how can those of us who are not quite familiar maybe contribute?
Yeah. So the Negro Leagues Family Alliance, we actually have a website, negroleaguesfamilyalliance.com. It is Negro Leagues with an S. I know that's a long name to type out, but it's important, right? So when you go to our website, you actually can see all of the members. Off the top of my head, our president is Sean Gibson, who's the great grandson of Josh Gibson, of course, the great Josh Gibson, Lydia Teasley and Ron Teasley. Like I mentioned, Ron Teasley before, the 96-year-old living legend who played for the New York Cubans. He's also a part of our family alliance along with his daughter. Um, Also, Doug Foster, who's related to Bill Foster and also the great Rube Foster, who created the Negro Leagues. Um, we have Buck Leonard's family, represented by Rose Hunter and Brian Patterson. We have Patrice and Dennis Biddle. We have, I don't want to forget anyone because now I'm going to get in trouble, Shakeia. You got me.
I just thought you'd give
This is
us
a
a
test.
few. You
I'm the
don't gotta
teacher.
go.
You're giving me the test. I'm the teacher. You're giving me the test. Come on. Who am I forgetting? Deborah Richards is related to um, Ted Double Duty Radcliffe, who's also a relative of ours, my grandmother's uncle. It's funny how that works. A lot of baseball
Hmm.
connections in this family. Um, and I think I mentioned and Pete Hill's family, Ron Hill,
You're still
Loretta,
going.
and
You're
Rasheen.
you're committed to this
Yes.
answer.
I'm committed. You asked me, I gotta make sure I shout everybody out. If
He
I
said,
forgot
"I'm gonna
anyone, I'm
get
sorry.
everybody in there as we turn on the award show music."
Right there, I'm like, how come
Um,
you didn't mention me?
yeah, no, we will say here if you are listening and Vanessa did not name your family, you can blame me because she really tried. She really did. There we go. We
I
got
think
that
I got
disclaimer out
everybody.
there.
Thank you. You got my back. I knew you would have my back.
Yeah, of course, that's what I'm here for. I I find this whole discovery thing for you, this journey for you, to be so intriguing, right? Like I grew up with grandparents in the South who stayed in the South. Also grew up with grandparents from the South who moved north in the 50s, right? So like these are important parts of our legacies as African American, people in this
Yeah.
country. And your grandfather's journey, what do you know about it? What did you take from it? Give us some give us a story.
So one of the stories I love to tell is, thinking about what my grandfather thought about racism. That was something I always wanted to know from the time I was old enough to understand, or I thought I understood what racism was in my teenage years, then all the way up through adulthood. And so I was blessed to have my grandmother with us, like I said, till 2014. She actually lived with my family. So she was like, I say sometimes she was my best friend, my roommate, everything. She's like, "Can I borrow your clothes? Will you take me shopping? We do this, we do that. We, cook together, ate together, watched TV together, everything." So she was, an incredible and influential figure in my life. And so I repeatedly asked her, "What did Granddad think about racism?" Because I thought that could help me too, on my own journey in terms of understanding history, understanding purpose, understanding how to move forward in life, but also just giving more context to his story as a player and as a person. And grandma said the same thing every single time I asked her. She said, he just said that's just the way things were. And I was completely shocked by that to some extent. And I also was not satisfied with that answer, right? Because to me, as a young person, I thought that means he accepted it. That means that he just was like, oh, well, there's nothing I can do about it. As I continued to grow and evolve, then I understood, okay, I don't think he was accepting it. I think that he knew that it was up to him to protect his inner light and that he knew he should not look for external validation in this world, especially as a Black man and a dark skinned Black man living in
Mm-hmm.
America. Right. So that was a lesson that I took with me that I still keep with me about, like, to be honest, like, destiny has no expiration date. Greatness has no expiration date. I think my grandfather not receiving the accolades during his lifetime, it didn't matter to him. He was still going to be committed to being his best self. And I think that he was able to focus and not worry too much about what was going on around him, which is astounding. We watched 12 Years a Slave today in school, of all things to watch. And, it really put things in the context, I think, for our students about how different the lives they live are today. But when I watch a film like that, I always tell the students, for me personally, I am very aware of where I come from and the privileges that I have in this time, and how the friendships that I have, the job that I have, the students that I get to look at every day, all of that is a direct result of people like my grandfather persevering, staying strong like concrete, right? Having a positive attitude and not succumbing, to all of the horrific things that were happening. And I could talk about Granddad all day in terms of the things that I've learned from him, but those are definitely some things that have stuck with me, and I definitely want to make sure that um, I honor his life with the life I live.
Would you say that the fact that your grandfather and others, they they knew that those accolades weren't coming, right? And they pressed on anyway. Do you
Right.
think a part of that is why you all fight so hard for him and others to get the recognition, because they knew it wasn't coming and you feel okay, we're going to go get it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and some of my friends and colleagues joke of like, your grandfather was so quiet, but it seems like your family is not that quiet. When it comes down to my grandma, if you met my mom, my aunt, and then I'm starting to take after them a little bit too now. So, I think it is important to speak up, and I think during the time that he lived, it probably, I won't say probably, it was dangerous to have a
Mm-hmm.
voice. And like I said, the issue of colorism, him being a dark skinned Black man at that, I think that he was conditioned in a way to do his thing quietly and silently. And so I think that he was like he was able to let his bat do the talking, right? To
Mm-hmm.
put it where baseball fans can really understand that. And I think that's how he lived his life just in general. And I think actions definitely speak louder than words too. But I also recognize that, especially in this time, it's important to raise your voice, to continue to spread awareness. We live in a time where I think people are starting to want this information and wanting to learn not just his story or the stories that have been told to us. Shout out to Lauren Hill saying the miseducation, right, that we've all
Mm-hmm.
received. I think people are ready now to really have some genuine and thoughtful and real and uncomfortable conversations about our history and how that informs our present. And so as an educator, of course, I have to make sure that I speak up, but having been an athlete too and a coach and loving baseball and all the sports, I mean, I have to make sure that people know this information about one of the greatest batters you've never heard of.
Greatest batters. One of the greatest batters you've never heard of. So I know that you know grandpa's stats then, right? I
I mean,
I
I do.
feel I know that you know this. So I'm gonna put you on the spot here. Tell
Oh,
us,
okay.
Vanessa, how good was granddad? Let's hear about
I
it.
mean, so, and as you know, the stats thing is like a controversial topic, right?
Mhm.
So, but looking at baseball reference, one thing I always love to point out is that he batted 348. Um, and then if you compare that to one of the greatest players of all time that everybody knows, no question, Babe Ruth, 342. So the context of that, and I know people will argue about, well, how many at bats and this and that and whatever. But I'm like, come on, everybody that played in the Negro leagues, or at least a lot of the big voices, have already shared like one of the greatest hitters of all time. You know, as good as anybody who played baseball. If they don't put him in the Hall of Fame, take me out. You know, he was as good as anybody who ever played ball, including Josh Gibson, right? So when I hear things like that, I mean, I think it validates the statistics. You know, Granddad led the
Mm-hmm.
league in triples. He, you know, stole many, many bases. He had um, 5 appearances in the East West All Star game. You know, some sources say he won 7 batting titles. You know, so I mean, the stats are there in terms of how great he was as a hitter. But then also people say he could go get any ball. So when we talk about him on the you know on the other side playing defense, I mean I watch players now. You know, the Tigers have Riley Green out in center field. So I will watch players now chase down a ball and lay out for it or whatever. And I'm like trying to imagine what did my grandfather look like out there, you know, when he was doing this too, because according to what people said, I mean, he would have been making Sports Center highlights all the time. So I'm just astounded by the fact that he was not only a great hitter, but also a great center fielder too, as well. And being so prolific on both sides, the fact that people still don't know his name, again, that's mind boggling to me in a way, but also very familiar, being familiar with Black history.
Mm-hmm. So, with all your grandfather's baseball skills, are you good at baseball?
I knew you were gonna ask that. Everybody, everybody goes there, right? Like, did that get
I feel
past
like you
you?
have to. You have to. You can't
So
you can't be out here in the jerseys and like talking legacy and you're like, actually, I kind of stink at it. You gotta pretend at least, right?
So I feel like grandpa's baseball genes were transformed into basketball genes for me. I always say, you know, baseball's in my blood, but basketball is life. So I ended up playing basketball in
Okay.
college. In middle school, I did play softball and I did play center field in
Mm-hmm.
honor of granddad.
Mm-hmm.
But then, you know, as I was getting more serious about recruiting and just focusing on basketball like that, I knew that was my number one love. Then I gave up the other sports as well. And I was like, I'm going to drill down on this and try to follow in his footsteps in terms of focus. Uh, but I can go to the batting cages. I can hop in a little softball charity game or whatever. And we did actually have a game. Jack White, who's the rocker, he
Mm-hmm.
loves the Detroit Stars. He used to eat lunch at Hamtramck Stadium where the Stars played, and so he had a charity event there, and I was able to play in that game, in honor of Granddad, and play on that field, which was an incredible feeling, stepping onto the field where my grandfather once played. And I got one hit out of two. So I think that's pretty good for not doing this all the time. But
Yeah.
I'm gonna sharpen my skills so that the next time we step out there, I'll be batting 1,000.
Okay. All right. You heard it here. She's gonna practice, y'all. And then I'm gonna start asking you questions, but only like Allen Iverson. We talking about practice,
We
not a
talk-
game. Practice. That's one of my favorite
and
sports
I
rants in
accept any
life.
challenges too for basketball.
Oh,
So if
oh,
that,
ooh.
that's no question. So
All
if
right,
I
Vanessa
shooting a
crossover.
3-pointer, yeah, so we could do that. So
All right. I'm gonna jump to a question from the chat. This is from Josh. Josh wants to know what kind of support and collaboration have you had with the museum in Kansas City?
So that's a work in progress. We have reached out, in terms of the Family Alliance, reaching out to Bob Kendrick, who we know does a great job at the museum, to try to get some things going. Nothing ever really got off of the ground, but we're looking forward to, collaborating with him in the future and with MLB too as well. We do have a great partnership that's forming right now with them. So we're looking forward to the events in the new year. So stay tuned. Hopefully some really cool things will be happening. I know there's tons of stuff coming up, right? The Rickwood Field event, down in Alabama. I know yesterday the East-West All-Star game was announced in May over at Cooperstown with all the legends of Black baseball that played within MLB. So many Tigers on that list too, on that roster. I was happy to see that. So, hopefully we'll be involved in these events. And I know the museum in Kansas City is getting a makeover. I look forward to seeing that that new vision come to life, and hoping I'm hoping that the Family Alliance will be able to help out a lot with that too as well.
Maureen would like to know what kind of fielding stats that they keep in the Negro Leagues.
What type of
fielding stats?
Shakeia, help me out with that.
Oh, you asking the wrong person because I don't commit anything to memory. Maureen, you are in the right group for this because someone here can answer that for you and they will answer it in the chat. I believe in you all.
Yeah, team
Jason
effort.
wants to know what is your favorite book about the Negro Leagues? And did you like Only the Ball Was White?
Only the Ball Was White's classic. I think that's definitely number one. Also, I think, oh my goodness, I had the book behind me. What's it called? The book is called John Buck O'Neill by Phil Dixon. I enjoyed that one a lot too, as well. There's so many. I'm gonna get in trouble if I start listing off books and not naming others, because I will get text messages and emails about that. So I would say I love all the books about the Negro Leagues. Larry Lester has some incredible books too, as well. Check out all of his books. I know Leslie Heafy and definitely Gary
All
Gillette
favorite
is
members.
coming.
All these
Yeah,
people,
they go hard. So all of their books, and I will say this about the books: the books have helped me learn about my granddad in ways that my grandmother may not have mentioned, for example. Or my mother says all the time that Gary Gillette, a historian here with us in Detroit, he's taught her things about her father that she didn't even know. Right. So, I mean, the power of these books is really important. We love literature just in general. And I have to say that as an English teacher, but these books are actually helping us to fill in the gaps in terms of family members learning about through the work of incredible, fantastic historians. So shout out to all the Negro Leagues books for sure.
Interesting question. Would you have any idea on how much your granddad was paid to play baseball?
Not enough. Can I say that?
That's
not nearly enough.
You absolutely can. You
Not
absolutely can.
Enough. Because he also was, I don't have an exact number in front of me, but I know that he still worked. So he was working at the Briggs Manufacturing Company, which, made cars. And it was interesting because Walter Briggs actually owned the Detroit Tigers when my granddad was working for him. So the fact that he would not let my grandfather play for the Detroit Tigers, but yet he was allowed to work in his, auto plant, just goes to show you the levels of dehumanization, how my grandfather was not viewed as a human being, right? But he was only good for service. So unfortunately, we all missed out as a result of that. But also, granddad was very hardworking as well, and not bitter about that. Again, something I asked my grandmother about, just saying, how did he feel about that? What did he say? Never talk bad about Walter Briggs or anyone else. So I think that's a testament to, his character and also his integrity.
Better than me. Way better than me, Is there anything that historians and researchers at SABR could do to support the NLFA? I'm not gonna lie to you, Scott. I read that NFLA and I was like, why are we talking about football?
It does, like, right. If you leave that A off, it's just NFL, right? That's just how it worked out with the name. Yes, please, like I said, go to our website, NegroLeaguesFamilyAlliance.com. We talk about our initiatives there. We are trying to advocate for a Negro Leagues Day within Major League Baseball, because we would love to see all of the teams do what the Detroit Tigers do so well here in terms of having recognition for the Negro Leagues players and teams, but we wanted to be league wide, right? So that every team on May 2nd, which is the same date as the very first Negro League game that was ever played, would recognize that. So we're trying to make sure that we move forward with that. We also have a program that is aiming to help Black youth and marginalized communities pertain to sports and education. We also have a mental health awareness initiative, and then also a digital literacy initiative. So again, a big focus within education in terms of the Negro Leagues Family Alliance. So, and also you can donate to the Alliance too as well. We do have a donate button on the website as of today. That's brand new. So you can go there and help out with that too as well. So you can also join. You don't have to have a Negro Leagues family member to be a part of the Family Alliance. You can also join as a supporter. And so the information about that is on our website if you go to the membership link within the incredible website. So check it out. Let me know what y'all think. We would love to hear from you.
Vanessa, actually, before I go to the next question, can you tell everyone here your Twitter handle so that they can direct any questions after this about the family website to you?
Oh yeah, sure. So on Twitter, at Turkey Stearnes, which is also named Hall of Fame DNA, which is my Instagram too as well. At Hall of Fame DNA with some underscores in between the words. And then I also have a personal Twitter that's linked to my at Turkey Stearnes Twitter, which is at VT Love One Another. So you can definitely reach out on any of those. And, I'm also on Facebook too as well.
Thank
And then
you,
the
because I
website,
have
of
a feeling.
course, Hall of
Right,
Fame
go to the
DNA.
website.
Hall of Fame DNA. Definitely go
Use
there,
that
which has all that information in case you forgot.
that new donate button. Steve would like to know, what was it like for you as a teenager going to Cooperstown and seeing your grandfather inducted?
In a way, I wish I could do it again because I don't think I fully appreciated the experience just based off what I know now, right? Having hosted the podcast, having all of these great conversations with historians, and I'm a part of the Friends of Historic Hamtramck Stadium board. And so, I've talked to so many people now and I have been enlightened by so many things that I think my experience would be different if, let's say, it were tomorrow instead of in 2000. But I'm still very grateful for being able to attend that as a 16-year-old who has, just gotten their license and granddad's going in the Hall of Fame at the same time. So I was astounded by I felt like it was a baseball planet. That's the best way I could describe it, that it was not a part of the United States, that it was its own world, right? Where everyone had to eat, sleep, and breathe baseball. The coolest thing for me, like I said, my grandma was and still is one of my greatest heroes. The coolest thing was seeing her as a woman on that stage in a sea of men and being herself, her complete and natural self the entire time, like looking over Commissioner's shoulder as he's reading the Turkey Stearnes introduction, and she's looking to make sure that he's doing it correctly, right? She's like literally looking like, and you can see that she's nodding like, very good. Yep, that's what you should say. Yep, next line. And I'm like, Grandma, give him some personal space, back up a little bit, move over. But that was just her, and then when she gave the speech, my mom had rehearsed the speech with her over and over and over. My mom's definitely a perfectionist, wanted to make sure it was incredible. And so I had heard it many, many times. I was in charge of timing it when we were rehearsing at home. So I knew the speech line for line, word for word. Grandma gets up there and freestyles the beginning of it. Just completely says freestyle, just says, do you know how I feel standing up here in front of all of you beautiful people? I feel great. And the crowd just started roaring, cracking up, because here she is being herself, quoting Tony the Tiger, in
Yeah.
Frosted Flakes on baseball's grandest stage, right? Just being her. And I love that moment so much. My mom still to this day will like put her hand on her head and just be like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe she did that, but I love that she was being authentic and she had worked for that moment, 21 years
Hmm.
of writing letters in perfect penmanship, by the way, right? 21 years and seeing that fulfilled, seeing that dream fulfilled and standing there, representing grandpa and doing it well.
Hmm.
She belonged there. So that was my favorite memory from it. Also, Sparky Anderson showing her so much love. He acted like they had been friends forever. I mean, they're just laughing and joking every time I'm looking at them. And I it was cool to see her in her element, but also hanging out and rubbing elbows with baseball's greatest stars.
When was the NL Families Alliance created, and is there something specific that set it in motion?
I'm not sure about the exact year. I know it was several years ago. My family just joined about 2 years ago. And I think the main thing was that they recognized that the families were out here and that we wanted to be unified and we wanted to be one voice. And so, preserving and protecting the legacies of these Negro Leagues families was really important, but coming together to do that because we're scattered, right? We're not all in the same place geographically. And then also, it just seems like as these Negro Leaguers are passing away, not enough people are reaching out to the families and asking for the stories or the artifacts. And there's a wealth of knowledge within this group. And I know there's more out there in the world too. So just really wanting to have a stronger community in terms
Hmm.
of the Negro Leagues families and coming together to do that. And also, like I said, obviously embarking upon those initiatives too. But that was the main goal, was to bring everyone together as one voice. And um, the Josh Gibson Foundation has a webinar coming up this weekend on Saturday, that you can still register for, where some of our Family Alliance members will be talking about the legacies and more about the group too as well, if you all want to join that.
I'm looking it up right now, you all. The next question for you. I've read that Turkey Stearnes treasured his bats. Did your
Right.
grandfather still have any in his possession? And did your grandmother have any memorabilia in her possession?
So one of the coolest things about my granddad is that he was a giver, right? And he really cared about kids. And like I mentioned before, telling kids to stay in school and all that stuff. But he also gave away his gloves, his bats, his balls, all of his equipment. So we actually don't have anything left except for my mom has one ball that was signed at the Negro Leagues reunion in Greenup, Kentucky, before grandpa passed, and it has the signatures of several players, and his signature too as well. So we treasure that within the family. But there's so many things. Like I said, even Gary Gillette actually emailed me today, and he said that my grandfather played in Denver, Colorado, and had won um, a watch for his performance in one of the games or tournaments. And so, he's like, let me know if this turns up somewhere. I'm like, I wish that, wishful thinking. I hope it does turn up someday. But I mean, to be honest, there's really virtually nothing left, which is a shame, but also the story of the Negro Leagues, right? Of just like the history was erased. So were the artifacts too as well. And a lot of this stuff was not preserved, and it's really a shame.
Yeah. Yeah. I also think some of the reason a lot of things weren't saved is uh, we weren't exactly like taught how to archive our own things, how to save our
Mm,
own things. We lose things to basements flooding, to Hurricane Katrina and others, right? Like a lot of Black history has been washed away with time, simply because we weren't aware that we needed to be saving it,
right.
which is something I advocate for a lot, to everyone, regardless
Yeah.
of what your family did. Save things, put it in
Please.
plastic, put it away. Um, you will thank yourself later for that.
Right.
Let's see. Michael bought your book at this year's Negro League conference.
Okay, Michael,
How
let's go, Michael.
how
MVP,
long
Michael.
how long did you take to write it, and how did the writing of the book affect you emotionally?
What? Oh my goodness. So the book didn't take too long to write. It did take 1 year. For me, I feel like that's kind of short in terms of what I've heard about other authors and their process. The book definitely flowed out of me in terms of, being ready to tell this story. Like I said, I teach English. I read everyone else's writing for a living. I listen to podcasts and I'm a big movie buff and all that. So the storytelling aspect, I was ready to tell the story inside of me, which is one of the biggest stories inside of me. And also, I had so much to say to my grandfather that I figured the best way to do that would be through a book. So I don't need to
Mm-hmm.
wait. Right. It's like, okay, someday I hope to meet him in heaven and have this conversation. And then I actually said, you know what, let me empower myself right now. Let's have the conversation now. I recognize
Mm-hmm.
that he will not be able to speak directly to me, but I think he's been speaking to me through these events, like even talking to you right now, Shakeia, the podcast, the Centennial, the Negro Leagues weekend, all of that stuff. So I wanted to document, um, what's been happening since Grandpa passed in 1979. As you mentioned, Shakeia, is so important to, make sure that we preserve all of the things, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think preserving his story through this book was really important. And it was an incredibly emotional journey. There were definitely times where I had to pause. And in my heart, my grandmother is just as important as my grandfather. I know that
Absolutely.
grandpa was the player, right? The celebrity in terms of the stats in the Hall of Fame, but my grandmother was a queen too as well. And so the book is dedicated to her. And so that was very emotional for me of, remembering everything that she's taught me about him and pouring that into the book, but also just having to talk about really hard things that, as I mentioned before, the situation with Briggs Manufacturing Company, Walter Briggs saying no jigs with Briggs and that being a racial slur and unpacking what that meant for me
Mm-hmm.
and also trying to talk to my grandfather as I'm writing this book, thinking about what that would mean for him too as well. Thinking about, him being excluded from the majors in the context of that. Thinking about standing on his shoulders and all the things that I've been afforded and being, the things that I've been able to do since he's been gone. Thinking about my mom's connection to him and also my aunt. So, I shared that in the book as well. But then also, of course, the interview, I think that was the most emotional piece. Like I said, listening to my grandfather's voice for the first time, I detailed that in one of the chapters of the text. And that was the part that I think got a lot of people, a lot of messages about how many tears were shed as they were reading through that chapter. So there is joy in the book too as well, but it's an emotional journey and it's something that I'm really proud of. So I hope you all can check it out and let me know your thoughts for sure.
Um, this will be our last question. It's from Michael. Most of the players in your grandfather's era played for multiple teams, barnstorming where they could find teams. Was that true of your grandfather?
That he barnstormed. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. Absolutely. And they even played against the Tigers, according to what I've been told too, and beat them. So, my grandpa Turkey traveled a lot more than I realized. Like I said, a lot of things that have come to me over the years have revealed that he was not just someone who played in Detroit and Kansas City and Chicago and all the teams that he played for within the Negro leagues that are often talked about or mentioned on the most prominent websites. But then there's other games that were documented that, of course, don't count as the official games within the Negro leagues
Mm-hmm.
and whatever. So, playing in Cuba, playing in Canada, like I mentioned, I just learned today that he played in Denver, Colorado, that I learned last summer that he had played in California. So I was like, Grandpa traveled a lot more than I gave him credit for. And he's been
Mm-hmm.
places
Mm-hmm.
that I haven't been. So I need to get on that, number one. But also, it really speaks volumes about, because if you've studied the history of Black mobility in this country, um, to have so many rules, and especially Jim Crow, limiting where you can go and how you can move. The Negro Leagues was a great catalyst for actually having these players travel the world and having a full or rich experience while still being, discriminated against,
Mm-hmm.
and mistreated, of course. But I was really shocked to see how many places he had been. So I think I'm going to continue to learn about more places that he's gone over time. Because again, that's just the story of the Negro Leagues. I learned something new every single day.
Um, Michael, I'm gonna tell you, you should definitely hit Vanessa up on Twitter for that question specifically in a DM. Vanessa, thank you so much for talking to us about your journey, about granddad, about the
Yes.
strength of your grandmother in keeping the fight going for so long. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out with us, and thanks for your questions. Um, that's it. Have a good night, everyone. Vanessa,
Thank
I
you
need you
so
to hang
much.
on.